you did a very interesting study in 2013 about grade 6 pupils as opposed to grade 6 teachers. Would you explain what you did?
Yes, sure. So that study was published in 2013, but it reflects on data that was collected in 2007, and the report was published in 2011. And what happened was they tested 61,000 students from 14 African countries in something called the Southern and Eastern African Consortium for Monitoring Educational Quality. We call it SUCMEC, understandably. And what this does is it tests grade 6 students in maths and in language, but it also tests their teachers. And one of the things that we found in South Africa is that teachers in the weakest part of the schooling system, which actually makes up the majority, have exceedingly low levels of content knowledge, to the extent that the poorest 20% of teachers, grade 6 maths teachers, know less mathematics content than the best performing 5% of grade 6 students. So these are 12-year-old students in South Africa that are outperforming 20% of teachers. So let's be clear, it's not their own teachers that they are outperforming. It's students from urban schools, from wealthier schools, from better performing schools. The top 5% are outperforming teachers in rural areas in poorer schools. But it's still highly problematic that those teachers have such low levels of content knowledge, and much lower levels of content knowledge than in some of our neighboring countries and in many of the East African countries as well.
So the problem really runs quite deep and quite deep through the system.
Definitely. And there's also, the stress on teachers has been, the DBE, the department and the minister have been focusing on teachers. And in some of her statements, she's mentioned that teachers need to be trained, they need to be capacitated. But sometimes when there's a clash with the unions, where the unions don't want to be tested or they don't want to sort of adhere to accountability mechanisms, you've got problems. And given that this is the matric season, one of the obvious problems is that there were no competency tests for those who marked the matric exams, except for those in the Western Cape, where it's been happening for a few years already. So you've got teachers that are marking these tests that are effectively determining the future of many of these students that are writing the matric exam, and yet they've never actually written competency tests to prove that they have the content knowledge and the marking skill to be able to give these students the marks that they deserve.
This is such a huge problem. How would you suggest addressing it?
So I think that the minister and the department have put in place a number of very effective reforms. So I don't want to cloud the analysis when we say that, this is terrible that these 550,000 students, that no one is speaking up for them. It's not as if the department is doing nothing. It's just that for us who can see the reality, it's difficult to celebrate when no one is speaking for them. But some of the important things that have been introduced, some things like the annual national assessment, what we call the ANAs, which test primary school students in mathematics and language, all primary school students. These are very important initiatives because it helps us to identify which schools are struggling, how do we target support to those schools, those kinds of things. We also have the ministers committed to an externally evaluated grade 9 exam, so that we don't have this problem of students just getting pushed through the system from grade 1 all the way up to grade 10 and 11, even though they're not acquiring skills. So this is one of the huge problems in South Africa, is that these children are being pushed through the system. They're not acquiring the basic skills in primary school, and then they carry these learning deficits with them as they go until they get to grade 10 and 11, and you can't push them into matric because it's an externally evaluated exam. So the minister, by trying to implement that grade 9 exam, and she's committed to do this over the next 3 years, is hoping to sort of stop that from happening and perhaps remediate problems. But the real solution that we find in the research is that we need to intervene early. We need to be looking at primary school and even in the foundation phase, grades 1, 2, and 3, to ensure that children actually do acquire foundational numeracy and literacy skills. That's the real problem.